Hello everyone, Bag here, and welcome to my complete the Dahlia guide. Here we'll take a look at her builds, her teams, her playstyles, and her premium options, so that you can be a more informed player and puller than when you got here. Timestamps are below if you don't need a kit summary, and with that, let's get into things. The Dahlia is yet another 5-star Fire to Hilda unit, whose main role is in supporting the break archetype. Here is a look into her kit. Her basic does nothing special, while her skill sets up a 3-turn field. Daring today, aren't we? This field does two things. For one, it gives the entire team 50% weakness break efficiency. And for two, the team can now do super break damage even if the enemy isn't broken. Yep, you will literally always do super break damage while this field is active. To clarify, any super break source can proc from this field, not just ones from the Dahlia. And even if the enemy has a locked toughness bar, you'll still deal super break damage anyways. The only criteria here is that you have to deal toughness damage in the first place, so you either need to element match or have something like Fugue's 50% toughness damage modifier. Skilling also sends out a blast attack that does even damage to 3 enemies. It does 10 toughness evenly, meaning in single target, it does as much toughness damage as her basic attack. Oh, and also the field is set up at the beginning of combat with her technique, with it being in the category of the field is already there at the start of combat, like Fushron or Tribi, instead of her skilling at the start of combat like Ranmei, Cerebro, or Dipped. Her talent has another batch of mechanics tied to it, with the primary one being that she designates one ally and herself as dance partners. The other dance partner besides herself is either whoever initiates combat, or the ally unit with the highest break effect. Being the dance partner does a few things. For one, both of them get access to a 60% super break ratio. For two, the Dahlia's ultimate, which we'll get into in a bit, implants both of their elements, so the carries element and then always fire from the Dahlia. And for three, the Dahlia launches a follow-up attack once a turn after the other dance partner attacks. This follow-up attack is a 5 random bounce hit, with each bounce doing 3 toughness damage, while also regenerating 10 energy for her. These bounces specifically also get a 200% super break ratio, which is pretty large, but again, these bounces deal 3 toughness before factoring in weakness break efficiency anyways, so the high scaling is rather justified. Her second trace also gives 1 SP for every 2 follow-up attacks launched, starting with the first follow-up attack generating the first SP. The last thing from her talent is that she gets an extra starting 35 energy, meaning she's able to turn 1 ult with a turn 1 skill, or a turn 1 basic if she has an ER rope. Finally, her ultimate is rather unique. It starts off looking similar to Fugue's ultimate, being a simple AoE hit, but its damage is actually shared, similar to Cypher's ult or Finon's meteor and exit attack. This means its 20 toughness is spread depending on the amount of enemies. With 1 enemy, they take 20 toughness, while with 5 enemies, they each take 4. This also inflicts all hit enemies with the wilt status for 4 turns. The wilt status is a simple 18% death shred that also implants to dance partner's elements as we mentioned before. For her traces, her minor ones give speed, break effect, and effect res. And here's her base speed by the way. Her first trace is akin to Finon's second trace, giving the team a large amount of break effect for 3 turns that partly scales off of the Dahlia's break effect, but only when she is shielded or healed by an ally. This is less so an incentive to run her with a sustain, and it's more so just a way to make running a sustain not as sucky. Again, similar to Finon's trace. Her second trace we already talked about, and her third trace is unique. Firstly, whenever anyone implants on an enemy, they get 30% speed for 2 turns. This includes the Dahlia herself with her ultimate, meaning she gets inconsistent uptime of this buff. But then also, when an ally fire unit implants, that implanting hit gets a fixed extra 20 toughness, as well as them gaining 10% of their max energy. The Dahlia and Firefly are the only units that can use this. For the Dahlia, this means her ultimate hits a flat 20 toughness on each enemy on top of its spread, meaning it will deal a very respectable amount of toughness no matter what. And she'll also get 18 energy from her ult instead of the usual 5. For Firefly, well, TLDR, it removes her ult downtime entirely, substantially improves her toughness damage output, and she gets a permanent 30% speed buff that opens up new speed tuning options that we will discuss later. For leveling priority, her talent and ultimate are both very important for their super break ratio and death shred, while her basic and skill can really be left at 1, as her break damage doesn't scale off of them at all. Now, as for how to play the Dahlia, I mean, it's rather simple. Most of her utility is gained by her existing, again similar to Fugue. So then first, let's talk about how to play around her abilities. She does have a 3-turn field that needs upkeep, but in a lot of scenarios, you're likely to be spamming her skill a decent amount, as not only does it have better toughness damage in non-single target scenarios, and it obviously generates more energy, but she also generates extra SP with her follow-up attack, which should allow a good amount of SP leniency. Her signature light cone also gives 1 SP with every ultimate, which would then make spamming her skill even easier. For her ultimate, it has the usual pitfalls with the fact that it's a debuff that's only applied to the current on-field enemies. So in something like Pure Fiction, her Death Shred and implants will have rather shaky uptime for anyone who's not the boss of the wave. She will have around a 3-turn ult rotation with or without an ER rope, depending on if she skill spams or if she gets hit a good amount. This This is more than enough to upkeep her debuff against most enemies in other modes, while in Pure Fiction, depending on how fast you go, this is really only fast enough to consistently apply wilt to the first batch of a new wave as they spawn. Her ultimate is also what gives her a 2-turn speed buff, which feeds into the very obvious advice of, if you don't need her ult to clear a wave in time, save it. Wasting the 2-turn buff on action value that gets reset by a wave reset is a waste. And if you are able to immediately implant onto an enemy right as they spawn to maintain constant uptime of her implant and shred, then that would be ideal. Finally, the randomness from her follow-up attack has some control to it, in the sense that it depends on the dance partner's turn to actually be launched. So if you want to focus the bounces on a primary enemy, you can try and clear out other enemies with the rest of your team before your carry acts, so long as actually doing this doesn't waste toughness damage from your other teammates. This also good for her ultimate. Eliminating other enemies helps funnel the toughness damage onto one enemy, or if you want the opposite, you can wait for adds to spawn before ulting, as not only does this apply the wilt status to everyone, but it does also generate a larger amount of toughness damage, even if less is done to the primary enemy. It's also just very nice with all of her abilities that she can rely on her toughness damage to get use no matter what, as her AoE fire implant lets her and a lot of her common allies contribute universally. That fire implant also lets CORPA always work, so Rappa and Boothill can finally get off of Dahlia and can finally join Firefly in the premium planar lifestyle. Besides her passive stats, the main thing that Dahlia is doing most of the time is whittling down enemy toughness bars slowly but surely. Compared to her competition, she'll be doing a lot more than Ranmei or Fugue, and slightly less than HMC, at least when it comes to single target. But okay, how do those passive stats contribute to the team? Well, the two standout traits from the Dahlia is that A, she provides both weakness break efficiency and a super break ratio, and B, she harshly decentralizes the break archetype from, well, breaking. Looking at A, it should be noted that her super break ratio is rather low, so while it is a large damage increase if she's replacing the 0% from Ranmei, don't go thinking newer equals better when it comes to comparing her to HMC or Fugue. Still, this is our third access to super break from a support, and our third access to weakness break efficiency if we're also counting E1 Fugue, which means sustainless teams, or linkshot teams, can reach new higher caps of either stat. This is really relevant for the likes of Boothill or Rappa, who want to break either to keep enemies broken for their mechanics, or to frontload their damage against low toughness enemies, or it matters for the likes of Firefly because, well, more super break equals more damage. Super break scales off of toughness damage, by the way, so weakness break efficiency does scale directly with damage past just breaking faster. But when it comes to breaking faster, this is where the Dahlia's utility is kind of weird. Now, the only thing breaking an enemy does is a large hit of break damage, a higher damage ratio as broken enemies take more damage, it delays or interrupts enemies, which makes it easier to live in sustainless runs, and it allows certain mechanics to function. So if you are playing someone like pre-E2 Firefly, this basically means that you no longer have a damage window to play around. You just have a pre-break damage window and a post-break damage window, with not that much of a difference between the two. This also means stuff like Ranmei's re-breaking isn't as needed, as enemies recovering from breaking is no longer a death sentence, and is instead an opportunity to break them again for another large burst of break damage. But yeah, Rappa, Boothill, and well, most carries still want to break, meaning this utility is more so to make their path to breaking deal actual damage. That path, depending on who she's replacing, can also now be shorter, as again, she gives 50% weakness break efficiency. So even if a carry doesn't starkly benefit from her unique utility, her raw stats are still insanely good. The last thing to really go over here is a consequence of her high toughness damage, in that you don't want to steal breaks from your carries if you can help it. The Dahlia can deal some good break damage with her own personal break effect, but most carries have some mechanic in play to make sure that their own breaks will do a lot more. So since her follow-up attacks go after the carry's attack, try not to have the carry leave an enemy with very little toughness, as the Dahlia will likely steal the break from them afterwards. However, this isn't always a bad thing to do. Maybe you don't need the carry's damage to kill, and you want other enemies to be spawned in by their next turn. Maybe you want to give Boothill a trickshot stack, or maybe interrupting the enemy is more important than optimal damage. So yeah, most of the Dahlia's utility comes from her passive stats, her toughness damage, and her implants, which are relatively simple to navigate through. As long as you juggle her variable toughness damage with her spread and bounce moves, you should be fine, as her SP generation and 4-turn duration from her ulti buff means getting the most out of her should be relatively comfortable. A plug here to subscribe. 4.0 is upon us, eventually, so if you want this type of coverage for whatever awaits us in the next world, then stick around. Also, if you are a frequent watcher of this channel, then sub. True! Okay, back to the vid. Now let's look at how to build the Dahlia, where things are pretty simple. There are two camps of thought to take with her for how to build her. You either care about her personal damage, in which case you run Iron Cavalry and Kalpogni, or you care about her toughness damage and turn frequency, in which case you run Eagle and Von Whack. You can also mix and match these, but the thought process is the same. Break is still a thresholds based archetype, so it'll depend on the fight if giving the Dahlia one more turn or one more ult will actually make a difference in your clear speed. I'd say the damage build is the easiest to recommend, but having an Eagle build on standby is not a bad idea either. For stats, always go speed boots, and the chest and orb do not matter for damage at all, as they don't contribute to her break damage. If you're going sustainless, just go defense or HP main sets, or if you're running pearls, maybe you need EHR on the body, but mostly just go for whatever has better subsets. For rope, it's the same line of thinking as the sets. ER rope means more ults for better toughness damage, wilt uptime, and eagle procs, while break effect is better damage, and roughly 15% more break effect towards her first trace. If you aren't activating her first trace though, then ER rope becomes a lot more desirable. Again, you have a 3-turn rotation with ER rope. That's also rather attainable with 0 ER, assuming you get hit at least a little, or if you skill twice and basic once with only an ER planar. Getting hit isn't as safe of an assumption considering break teams slow down enemy attacks, which is why I'm more partial to recommend ER rope, but either can work. For stats to go for, you guessed it, the literal only important stats are break effect and speed, with EHR being important if you need it for her light cone. There's no specific breakpoint to hit in either stat, as her speed gets wonky with her inconsistent speed buff, but trying to get an effective 160 speed is a good general benchmark. The same goes for break effect. It's always good to have more of, whether or not her first trace is active, and there's no real point when it stops being worth it to go for. For her light cones, as an Ahildi support, she's got a lot of standard picks. There's Pearls for the 16% Death Shred, the Battle Pass light cone for up to 16% vulnerability, although good luck getting that and the Harmony Battle Pass option to S5, or Cypher's signature with its extra speed and 24% Death Shred. All of these are good generic options, with the only consideration being to not overcap on Death Shred depending on what your team already has, as getting as close as possible to 100% is the goal, while anything over 100 is flat out wasted. Also remember Pearls doesn't stack, so you cannot run it on her and Fugue at the same time. Her signature, meanwhile, gives 60 break effect, which is something, 1 SP every ultimate, which is also something, but the main attraction is that 32% break damage dealt buff to her and the dance partner. This break damage dealt multiplier is unique to only this Lycone and the Harmony Battle Pass Lycone. Oh, and E4 Fugue, I guess, meaning it's a very undiluted stat. If you aren't running the Battle Pass Lycone, it's a straight up 32% damage increase, which is a lot more than any other option. Is it needed to make her good? No, the other options do the job just fine, but I would say it's an above average support Lycone in terms of raw stats. For other options, there's Fugue's signature if you're for some reason not running this on Fugue, or Tutorial if you really care about her energy, but I would just recommend to run Pearls instead. And lastly, Solitary Healing is decent for giving more break effect and the occasional energy. So for a pure stat stick, if you don't want to deal with the effect hit rate from other options, it's not a bad choice either. For teams, well, I already have a video on this if you want a more detailed look, but the short answer is that literally every break team wants her in some magnitude. She's not the priority for every break team, like Rappa and Boothill would still prioritize Fugue first before getting her second, but there's not a single break team that doesn't have her somewhere in their main 4 core. Specifically, she's a big increase to Firefly, as not only does she get specially tailored buffs just for her, including the removal of her ult downtime on top of removing her break damage window, as well as the extra fixed toughness damage, but the permanent extra speed also leads to a new bit of rotation. You use these speed breakpoints to basically get 5 enhanced skills and 150 action value, assuming the first enhanced skill comes from entering the ult form in the first place. So yeah, TLDR, she's really good for Firefly, who would have guessed. She is still a massive upgrade for the likes of Boothill and Rappa as well, but their mechanics that revolve around breaking makes it hard to fully utilize every part of her utility. But still, having 50% weakness pick efficiency and high toughness damage means that she also helps in letting you break fast if that's what the team needs. She fills both roles just fine. And then for everyone else you could ever possibly think of, yes, she is best in slot for their break teams. There are no exceptions to this, so I don't really want to go through each carry one by one. I think the more relevant thing to ask is, does she make break worth running? Which is a loaded question. I do think sustainless runs do have a much higher, more impressive ceiling with her, but this more so puts them on par with a lot of 3.x carries, rather than being a new peak above them. Kinda like how Heislands felt with Dot back in 3.5. Although all of this assumes sustainless, which, again, is hard to fully expect for players to always run successfully. With that Heislands comparison, I think the advice here is the same with her and Dot. If you like break and you want to play it, you pull the Dahlia. But if you don't care about break, then I don't really think the Dahlia will change your mind on the archetype. Also, one last special mention to Linkshaw for being a carry that can activate the Dahlia's first trace, leading to her having some actual respectful clear speeds, especially in AoE scenarios that actually favor her. Last up, we have her Eidolons. Her E1 does a few things. First off, it gives her 60% super break ratio to the entire team, while then also giving the dance partners an extra 40% super break ratio. On top of this, the first time a dance partner deals toughness damage to an enemy, they deal a fixed amount of added toughness damage equal to 25% 75% of the enemy's max, with a lower bound of 10 and an upper bound of 300, and this can only be triggered once per enemy health bar, which means that you can practice once per phase if an enemy has multiple health bars. This E1 is mostly useful in its extremes. Against enemies with large toughness bars, like say Hulei's current 264, this is a flat 66 extra toughness damage, meaning you can shave off an entire turn's worth of toughness damage before even breaking. This is also useful for its lower bound of 10 toughness, as adding that to every enemy in something like Pure Fiction can lead to much more consistent breaks, bringing something like Himiko or Linkshot's follow-up attacks from 20 to 25 toughness to 30 to 35 toughness, letting them break 30 toughness enemies with just a follow-up attack. This extra toughness does also equal more super break damage as well, which beyond just more damage is also useful for front-loading damage to more efficiently kill waves of enemies in Pure Fiction. I personally think her E1 and S1 are relatively equal in strength, both being very strong while also not needed to make her feel complete. This is not an E1 fugue scenario or anything like that. I would recommend S1 over E1 just because it's cheaper, but that does depend a bit on how other Lycones on her would factor into your team's total death shred, or if you do have other options like Cypher or Fugue's Lycone to give to her, while on the other hand her E1 is just a guaranteed flat upgrade that is pretty dang good. Her E2 gives 20 res pen while automatically wilting all enemies when they spawn, so 20 res pen is really good. Maybe not E2 good, but there are certainly worse E2s out there. This Eidolon is at its best in Pure Fiction, where auto-implanting and auto-death shredding enemies massively helps your utility, and makes Linkshot, Rappa, or Himiko much more easily slottable in non-element matching Pure Fictions. Outside of Pure Fiction though, it's relatively easy to have somewhat consistent uptime of the wilt status on the enemy, so auto-implanting is still nice, but again not exactly the difference maker that you would want from her E2. Her E4 gives 5 more bounces to her follow-up attack, so just doubling it from 5 to 10, while also adding a 12% vulnerability debuff to the follow-up attacks as an extra debuff. Most E4s are rather underwhelming, and yeah, you do not need me to tell you that getting 5 copies of her for 12% vulnerability is not an optimal way to vertically invest. But for E4 standards, it's not the worst thing in the world. And her E6 gives 150% break effect to both dance partners, and her follow-up attack now advances both dance partners by 20%. So a free S3 DDD every turn, and 2.5 break effect ropes worth of break effect. Not bad stats by any means, but for E6 standards, it is a bit meh. As usual, get it if you want it, as it's a big boost for sure, but for 7 cost, there's usually something better to get instead. And that's everything. Stopping by the channel member corner just to say that I appreciate every single one of you. And well, with that, I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Bye!